This first reading that we have today, I think, is a really important one for us as Catholics. We see the early church here in the Acts of the Apostles just getting started. It's been the readings that we've had throughout this Easter season because it's really the story right after Christ ascends into heaven. And we see the church, the Catholic Church, being founded and kind of just getting out of the gates and so forth. And so we have Paul and Barnabas traveling 2 by 2 as Jesus asked the apostles and disciples to do. They're traveling as a pair, and they come to the town of Antioch to preach the good news, to preach the gospel, and to really begin to build up the church in that particular city. And we see this happening all throughout the Acts of the Apostles. That's how the church spreads. That's how the church was brought to the whole world. And so what we see happening in that first reading is when Paul and Barnabas show up, basically what we see there is that as they preach the truth of Jesus Christ, some of the people in the town believe it and some reject it. Some do not receive and believe in the gospel. And in fact, those who don't, what we see happening in the reading today is that those who reject the gospel whip up a persecution against Paul and Barnabas and drive them out, kick them out of town, right? That's a pretty definitive way of rejecting the gospel, to kick out the person or the people who have brought it. And I think a couple things that are important for us as Catholics to take away from that. We see this happening elsewhere in the Acts of the Apostles, where that doesn't happen. The gospel is received and the community really thrives and flourishes. And so a couple of things for us. One of them, I think it's important to realize in that reading the power of the local community, the local parish, right? The power of the laity, the lay faithful in that community. We hear a lot about people wanting more power and more authority for the church, and I know exactly what we're talking about with that. I understand what we mean. But I think the first reading illustrates very clearly, right, the power that the laity have always had in the church for the last 2,000 years. Even in today's reading, at the very beginning of the church, as the church is just getting started, we read that the Catholic communities are not swayed as much by bishops or priests. St. Paul is one of the great saints, preachers, bishops of the church's history, right? And he is not able to sway the local community, right? We read in that reading, here's who has the power ultimately in that community beyond Paul and Barnabas. We read this: the women of prominence who are worshipers and the leading men of the city, the locals, the men and women of the community, either they encourage and allow the gospel to be received and planted in that place, or they work to expel it, drive it out. We do also hear in the reading that there were good believers in town, people who were excited about what they heard and were ready and did follow Jesus. But in the case of today's first reading, the laity, the women of prominence, and the leading men of the town win. They win. And they drive out the greatest preacher in the history of the Catholic Church. They drive him out. Catholic parishes, they all look the same from the outside. But what we see in every parish, in every community, right from the beginning of the church, we see it in today's reading. Just as it was in Antioch, there is a struggle among the people of God. This reading again tells us there were good people in Antioch, but they did not win. We're not told how hard they fought, but we just know they lost. And if you read the book of Revelation early on, Jesus addresses the different local parishes, the local churches that were already up and running in Asia. There's 7 of them. He writes a little bit to each one. And some of they're vastly different because of how the gospel was planted and flourished, or didn't. Some of them it did, some of them it didn't. Some are sick, some are thriving. Some have all but expelled Christ, and others are places where the gospel is flourishing. The laity have always had great power and authority in the church. This reading is also a really important one. The second thing I'd like to call our attention to is that it greatly counteracts the individualism that certainly is a part of our own American experience. We come from a very individualistic, hardworking, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. That's part of our genes. All right, that's been there from the very founding of our country, and there are good things about that, obviously. Hard work, discipline, all those kinds of things are good, right? But it can also have a negative effect on us as well. And no matter what the thing is, it can have good effects and it can have negative effects. And so one of the individualism, I think, can have a negative effect on our faith life. Because we can be tempted to start to think, you know what, it's all about me and Jesus, right? Because I'm an individual. But unfortunately, what that leads to then is that at the end of the day, then, if it's just about me and Jesus, then I don't really care what this person in the pew next to me that I don't really know that well, whatever they choose to do, who cares? It's about me and Jesus. Right? I don't care about the people that I'm at Mass with. I don't care about maybe the people that are in my community. I just need to take care of myself getting to heaven. That's a problem, right? That's something that we also have to counteract. That's something that's not what we see in this first reading, is that what happens in the larger community has a great effect on all of us in our own individual lives, right? It has a great effect on all of us. We have to be people, we are called as Catholics to care a great deal about what happens to my neighbor, the fate of my neighbor, and to even in some ways see my fate tied to theirs, right? My eternal salvation tied to the eternal salvation of the people that are here today, the other people that are a part of my parish, my local community, etc. Christ is always calling me away from my individual faith silo. Right? He's calling me out of that. And so things that we can be doing, we can care about each other, and we can be invested in one another, our local people, our local community, right? Our local group of believers, right? To make this a home. I think that's it too, right? We have to see these people around me as an authentic, real family, not just a pious platitude. To be people who build that community up and who seek to care for and help bring other people to heaven too, not just worrying about myself. And that kind of building up of community, that family life within the church, doesn't just have to happen here at the church building. There are lots of places, obviously, where that happens way beyond the walls of this church, where you're gathering with each other for meals, for prayer, to do works of charity, those kinds of things. That's what it means, and it can just continue to grow on an exponential level. There's already lots of that happening. And I think then, in conclusion as well, a final call to action is to be people, again, who speak up and engage within our parish, within the local community, within our own community. And we need to be able to challenge each other and to call each other out, to call each other higher, right? If we're in our faith silos, then if somebody comes to me and tries to call me higher, I don't care. They can say whatever they want, right? But if I respect them and I care for them and I call them higher and can challenge them, they can challenge me and we can help each other get to heaven. What if the good people in today's first reading had raised their voices as loudly as the people who were discontent and spreading gossip and rumors and all of this stuff that eventually leads to Paul being kicked out of town? What if those people had called them out and confronted those who were spreading these this spirit of discontent and all of that kind of stuff, right? So we pray to be people, I think, who are not locked into our own little silos of our faith, but people who are invested in and recognize that Catholicism, right from the start, has always been wrapped up in what's going on in my own local community, and to be people who care about that and work for the salvation